So, with tensions between the United States and Russia at an all-time high, and with uh, certain people like Kim Jong Un in North Korea threatening to nuke people, launching missiles, and just overall having a lot of very insane rhetoric, uh, a lot of people feel like we are at a very high threat level for some sort of nuclear disaster. Um, and that level of concern reaches all the way to the highest levels of the government, of course, and that is demonstrated uh, on full display today in a drill that is conducted by the government, and this is from Fox 5 New York. Feds prep for nuclear attack in New York. Federal authorities are running nuclear response drills at MetLife Stadium in northern New Jersey. Homeland Security and FEMA are conducting Operation Gotham Shield. The purpose is to practice how to assess, treat, and evacuate victims during a potential nuclear attack in the New York City area. The drills simulate a scenario in which 10,000 ton improvised nuclear device goes off on the New Jersey side of the Lincoln Tunnel. MetLife Stadium is serving as the primary response center during the multi-day drills. The stadium is in East Rutherford, about 15 minutes outside of Manhattan. The New Jersey and New York emergency management organizations are also taking part. The exercise is part of several that are taking place along the Northeast Corridor. Other drills are taking place in Washington, D.C. and Albany. Federal authorities say the drills are not in response to any current events, including possible threats from North Korea, of course, they would say that. Nothing to see here, in other words. This drill follows an exercise in October called Northern Lights that took place in Minnesota. So, they say that it's not in response to North Korea, for example. Of course, they're going to come out and say that. The chance that, the threat of something like that happening from North Korea, the fact, is that did probably play a part in this, whether they're going to admit that or not. But of course, the actual nuclear threat to the United States posed by North Korea is probably very limited, if even there at all. Of course, you've got Russia as well, and tensions between the United States and Russia are at basically Cold War levels, or even worse off than Cold War levels, according to some analysts and experts. So, of course, all this is playing part in this drill that's going on. And, of course, what this drill is part of is COG, continuity of government, which would be the system in place if some sort of devastating attack did happen and took out large portions of the government. Particularly, the president and vice president, etc., key members like that. There are systems in place if something like that happened to have the government continue, and those are COG programs. And, of course, you've got FEMA and Homeland Security conducting this Operation Gotham Shield, which, of course, is a part of, the COG program. And it is definitely a jam-packed day. Today, you've got the USS Carl Vinson making its way onto the Korean Peninsula. Today, you've got these drills going on in New York and other areas for a possible nuke, a nuke attack in the United States. And also, today, you have the President Trump, meeting with all 100 United States senators and several of his top military advisors to discuss North Korea. So this is from the Washington Free Beacon. Senators told North Korea nuclear threat is urgent. The Senate took part in a rare White House briefing on Wednesday to hear what senior leaders described as a, quote, urgent national security threat posed by North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. The hour-long secret session for all senators was held at the Eisenhower Executive Office building next to the White House and included a brief appearance from President Trump, who made short introductory remarks. Marine Corps General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also took part in the session. His presence is an indication that military options for dealing with North Korea likely were discussed. New steps by the administration will include the imposition of additional economic sanctions. Quote, the United States seeks stability and the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We remain open to negotiations toward that goal. However, we remain prepared to defend ourselves and our allies, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and Director of Intelligence Dan Coates said in a joint statement after the briefing. Senator John Barrasso, Republican Wyoming, told MSNBC the meeting was, quote, very consequential and included discussion of North Korea's shift from liquid to solid fuel missiles and improving nuclear weapons and missile capabilities. Barrasso said he favors increased sanctions, including sanctions on China. Senator Chris Coons, Democrat Delaware, called the sessions, quote, very clear-eyed, sober, and serious. Coons told MSNBC the administration is working to avoid a conflict and, quote, making it clear to China how serious we are about preventing North Korea from developing the capability to deliver a nuclear warhead by ICBM against the United States or one of our key allies, and that there are real efforts being made to avoid a misunderstanding or miscalculation, because I do think this is a very dangerous circumstance and situation. And as it stands right now, North Korea, according to most estimates, does not have a nuclear warhead small enough. They haven't miniaturized the technology to the point where they could actually put it on an ICBM, and on top of that, they haven't developed an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, that would be able to strike the United States as of yet. And they are working towards both of those goals. However, while openly saying that they are going, that they would nuke the United States, they will nuke the United States in certain circumstances. Of course, they launch missiles into the sea off the coast of Japan fairly regularly at this point, and they have threatened to continue to do missile tests, which are, of course, in violation of international law, and they have said that they're basically going to continue on the same path that they have been. But of course, now we have a president who is actually not going to allow that sort of rhetoric and that type of action from somebody like the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. So this meeting and that drill, they indicate just two more indicators that the situation is very serious and that the situation is more than likely heading towards some sort of conflict. Because it's very unlikely at this point that Kim Jong-un will fold to the requests of the United States and our allies, which would require them to completely abandon their nuclear and missile ambitions. And of course, we do, at least to a certain extent, the United States, we have China putting a lot of pressure on North Korea right now. They've restricted coal exports from China. They have come out and made statements saying that that North Korea is pushing towards dangerous capabilities that they shouldn't have, and that there is a chance that China itself will intervene and actually strike North Korea's nuclear sites, and actually intervene militarily to stop North Korea from continuing towards developing a ICBM and nuclear warhead, which is a dramatic shift in rhetoric from what China has historically done for North Korea. Historically, China has used North Korea as sort of its puppet regime, but ever since President Trump, he did the strike on Syria while he was meeting with the Chinese president, which was pretty incredible in and of itself. And of course, that sent a very strong message to China that this is an administration that's not playing around, and they are willing to take action, including military action, if they see fit. So, of course, it's a dangerous situation, and we've basically got to do something about it at this point. Of course, you've got the Carl Vinson, USS Carl Vinson, that is in the fleet now, that is in the Korean Peninsula. You've got a nuclear sub off the coast of South Korea. You've got Japan doing massive drills, planning to evacuate people from South Korea. The United States is planning on evacuating people from South Korea. China is lining up troops on the border of North Korea, awaiting refugees. I mean, the whole situation is building towards conflict in North Korea. So that is more than likely what's going to happen. So keep an eye out for that situation as it develops. And now we move on to a story from InfoWars. Report: Trump to withdraw from NAFTA. The Mexican peso is tumbling following reports that the Trump administration is preparing to pull the U.S. out of NAFTA. And of course, NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is seen by many people as sort of this globalist deal that sort of consolidated us into sort of one shared economy with Mexico and Canada. And I think in a lot of ways, I think some of the perceived negative consequences of NAFTA, for example, trade deficits, and some other things as well. For example, the loss of manufacturing jobs. I think a lot of these things are actually overstated, and I'll go through that in a little bit. The Trump administration is considering an executive order on withdrawing from the U.S. from NAFTA, according to two White House officials, reports Politico. The Mexican currency fell 2% at just over 19 per dollar following the report. President Trump has recently stepped up his rhetoric against the trade agreement, vowing to scrap the entire deal altogether. NAFTA has been very, very bad for our country, Trump said in a speech in Wisconsin last week. It's been very, very bad for our companies and for our workers, and we're going to make some very big changes, or we are going to get rid of NAFTA once and for all. During his first week in office, Trump signed an executive order to pull the U.S. out of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which would have solidified a 12-nation multilateral trade system with Pacific Rim countries like South Korea and Chile. Quote, the beautiful thing about a bilateral agreement is that if any one of the true parties in the agreement decides at any time they want to get out of the agreement, or they're not being treated fairly, they can renegotiate much easier, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said in January. In a multilateral agreement, that's not the case. So, of course, that's one of the big pushes that is for getting rid of NAFTA, is that bilateral agreements are better than multilateral agreements. And I I do agree with that. I mean, obviously, it is easier to do an agreement and to negotiate with one nation as opposed to being locked into an agreement with multiple nations. Um, at the same time, if it's a good deal between multiple nations, it's a good deal between multiple nations. Not saying that NAFTA necessarily was. Again, I think some of the downsides are actually overstated, but there definitely were some negative effects to NAFTA. But one thing that's interesting to note is that President Trump, as far as I know, hasn't really, beyond sort of vaguely condemning it. I haven't heard President Trump really go into specifics of why NAFTA is bad in his point of view. Again, I think there are some downsides to it, and I'm certainly no expert on NAFTA, but one thing I think you can look at that's important is the manufacturing jobs. So we have had a lot of manufacturing jobs lost in this nation. And one thing that is important to know is it's not necessarily because those companies chose to do business in other countries. A lot of the reason why car manufacturers, for example, aren't hiring as many people is simply due to automation. It's simply due to the fact that robots have replaced humans in many respects when it comes to auto manufacturing and other industries as well. So I think, for example, people overlook things like that, and they will just see the fact that there has been a significant loss in jobs, in manufacturing jobs in the United States since NAFTA, especially in certain industries like the auto industry. But then, the fact that something like, I think 80 some odd percent of it, according to estimates, is simply due to automation. I think that something like that gets overlooked. Also, when you look at trade deficits, when you look at the fact that we have something like a $50 billion trade deficit with Mexico, and before NAFTA, we actually had a trade surplus with Mexico, or it would balance out year by year, and it was basically even. And now, of course, it's upwards of $50 billion trade deficit. I think it's been as high as $70 billion 1 year. So people will see something like that and think, well, that's just has to be bad. And of course, some of it, of course, you've got some jobs that were simply lost to lower people who were getting paid lower wages. Yes, there's that aspect to it. But when you've got billions of American dollars getting put into a country like Mexico, a lot of the times what winds up happening is a lot of that money gets invested back into the United States many, many times. Also, you have to take into account the fact that Americans now pay a lower price for certain products, which means there is more money that stays in our economy because it isn't being spent on that vehicle. So things like that don't get taken into account. So that's money that, instead of going towards that vehicle, even if it was manufactured in the United States, can now go towards other goods and services, putting more money into the economy, expanding the economy, investing in businesses, expanding businesses, you name it. So when I look at the fact that Trump is possibly just going to completely scrap NAFTA, then you kind of see the potential fallout from that already going on, and that fallout would be a potential trade war. So what would wind up happening is these deals will be scrapped, and we would start putting, for example, price regulations. We would start putting tariffs on certain goods that we import, and then in retaliation, as has happened in the past, those other nations, Canada and Mexico, are just going to retaliate with tariffs of their own, and what's going to wind up happening is it's going to increase prices virtually for everybody. And it could potentially wind up with a no-win situation. One of the things that is oftentimes overlooked when people criticize deals like NAFTA is the fact that when you have these agreements, oftentimes you have very few tariffs. And when you don't have tariffs, obviously that means that you're not getting taxed for the stuff that you are importing into that country. And when you put tariffs up, that's the whole reason they have those agreements, is so there can be basically free trade between the countries without these sort of restrictions like tariffs. And what that does is that gives the best, price to the consumer. Not always the best quality, of course, but it does give the best price to the consumer. And it's just something that I think gets overlooked. I think people criticize NAFTA as being all bad. And of course, President Trump criticizes it as being all bad. I think there are some good aspects to NAFTA. And I think the alternative, which is potential trade wars and massive tariffs, with the goods that we trade between Canada and Mexico, I think that outcome is actually quite a bit worse. So hopefully we can come up with a solution that is the best for the consumer, because of course tariffs and increased prices are not going to benefit the consumer. The only people that is going to benefit are the corporations. So hopefully we don't move in that direction and start getting involved in trade wars. So that would be nice to avoid that if possible. And now we move on to a story from the Washington Examiner. Exclusive interview. Trump absolutely looking at breaking up Ninth Circuit. And of course, the Ninth Circuit is the super liberal circuit court. They are the ones that is the circuit court that blocked President Trump's travel ban. And of course, now they are back at it again, blocking his efforts at blocking funding, getting rid of funding for sanctuary cities that refuse to follow federal law. So the article goes on here. President Trump said Wednesday that he has, quote, absolutely considered proposals that would split up the Ninth Circuit, where judges have blocked 2 of his executive actions. Quote, absolutely I have, Trump said of considering Ninth Circuit breakup proposals during a far-ranging interview with the Washington Examiner at the White House on Wednesday. There are many people that want to break up the Ninth Circuit. It's outrageous. His comments came one day after U.S. District Judge William Orrick temporarily blocked Trump's efforts to withhold funds from any municipality that refuses to cooperate with immigration enforcement officers. Republicans have long criticized the Ninth Circuit for its perceived liberal leanings and its enormous geopolitical reach, which has led to bureaucratic backlogs. GOP lawmakers have repeatedly introduced legislation that would carve out several states under the Ninth Circuit's jurisdiction and create a new court designed to lighten the Ninth's caseload. The Ninth Circuit hears appeals from courts in 9 West Coast states and 2 U.S. territories. Of its 25 active judges, 18 were appointed by Democratic presidents. Trump said Wednesday that opponents of his policies have engaged in judge shopping, quote-unquote, in their efforts to find a sympathetic judicial platform for their partisan objections. Quote, you see judge shopping, or what's gone on with these people, they immediately run to the Ninth Circuit, Trump said, It's got close to an 80% reversal period, and what's going on in the Ninth Circuit is a shame. And the 80% reversal he's referring to is when the Ninth Circuit cases make their way to the Supreme Court. They have been overturned basically 80% of the time, which is, if you couldn't guess it, pretty darn high. The reason for that is because they have a liberal, radical liberal interpretation of the Constitution in many ways. In other words, they don't like the Constitution. And basically, they interpret laws as they would like them to be, not as they are clearly stated. As you saw very clearly in the case with the block on 7 predominantly Muslim countries. And the reason that it is very clear that that case in particular was judicial overreach is you can read the law for yourself, and it is quite clear. Federal immigration law clearly states that the president has the ability to block any alien or immigrant, basically, if there is a national security risk. Now, that is, of course, a paraphrase, not the exact law. You can look it up for yourself. It is a very clear portion of our federal immigration law. Literally, a child could read it and understand it. And the courts, when they made their ruling, didn't even use the language of the law. What they basically said is, because of Trump's personal statements towards Muslims, and because we know that basically his intention behind the law was to be a Muslim ban, that makes it illegitimate and unconstitutional somehow, which is of course ridiculous because you have to judge the law as the law is, and of course it was not a Muslim ban, it was a ban on 7 predominantly Muslim countries, which had been put on a terror list by the Obama administration. And it is very clear that the passports that these people are using very often are fake. They do not have anywhere near the proper level of documentation that you would need to be able to even come close to verifying who these people are. And of course, they're coming from war-torn, hellholes, where many times you've got groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda running around murdering everybody that doesn't, fall in line with their radical, interpretation of Islam. So, of course, it is very prevalent. ISIS has actually come out in their own manifestos openly and said that they will use the refugee program to infiltrate different countries with ISIS sleeper cells. So I mean, when you look at it all, it's clearly a national security issue. It's clearly a terrorist issue, and it was not a Muslim ban because, of course, something like 80% of Muslims in the world were still allowed to come to the United States under that ban. It was clearly geared towards countries that have high levels of terrorist activity that we are taking refugees from that we cannot properly vet. That was the problem. That was the issue, not a ban on Muslims because Donald Trump hates Muslims. And that's the kind of crap you get from the Ninth Circuit. And what Congress can do is they can actually break up the courts so that, like this was saying, it would delegate a couple of the states, a couple of those 9 West Coast states that they are under the jurisdiction of, and it would create a whole new circuit to quote-unquote lighten the load, to make it a little less easy for cases to go to that liberal haven. And that is definitely something that is long overdue in my point of view, because now, of course, you've got them blocking President Trump's proposal to cut federal funding to states that refuse to follow federal law. Doesn't seem too outrageous to me, but apparently, according to U.S. District Judge William Orwick, that is illegal, and that is overreach. That is executive overreach. So, completely absurd, considering the fact that what you have is actually a case of judicial overreach. But that is just the day and age that we live in. I mean, why do we even have a president anymore? How about we just have the Ninth Circuit make all our decisions for us? That sounds like a much better idea to me. And now we move on to my last story of the day. This is from the New York Post, and this one put quite a smile on my face. Ted Cruz wants El Chapo to pay for Trump's border wall. Yes, you heard that right. El Chapo, the El Chapo. Ted Cruz wants to build the border wall using a different kind of brick. The Republican Texas senator is proposing the U.S. use cocaine-tainted money forfeited by Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman to pay for President Donald Trump's proposed wall on the nation's southern border. It's funny to say cocaine-tainted money. I think the CIA admits that something like 80% of all money in circulation has some type of drug. There's some drug residue of some sort on it. So a little fun fact for you there. Cruz introduced a bill called Ensuring Lawful Collection of Hidden Assets to Provide Order, or El Chapo. So the acronym for the law literally spells out El Chapo. That is genius. Tuesday, that would repurpose $14 billion in assets the feds plan to squeeze out of Guzman to fund the project. So, my God, so they got $14 billion worth of assets that the feds are going to confiscate, or already have confiscated from this guy, and Ted Cruz is introducing a bill to use that money to pay for the border wall, to use El Chapo, the top the Mexican drug lord kingpin's illicit stash of money and assets to pay for the to pay for the border wall. That would just be too good. That would just be the most epic thing I have ever seen or witnessed in my life. I mean, Ted Cruz actually kind of became my hero just by introducing this bill. $14 billion will go a long way towards building a wall that will keep Americans safe and hinder the illegal flow of drugs, weapons, and individuals across our southern border, he said. Guzman was extradited to the U.S. earlier this year and pleaded not guilty to a 17-count indictment charging him with manufacturing and distributing heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana, as well as money laundering. And of course, you will remember that HSBC, the bank, actually had their own private window for El Chapo. Their own private window for El Chapo that he laundered his money through. Of course, HSBC got caught laundering billions of dollars in drug money and other illicit activities. And then they wound up getting hit. No one went to prison for it. They got caught. You can look it up. They got busted for it. No one went to prison. They wound up. Certain individuals had to pay a fine that amounted to literally a small portion of the money that they made laundering drug money. I kid you not. That is the type of craziness that we live with nowadays. So that's just absurd. But of course, that would just be the most delicious irony ever if El Chapo's drug money was used to fund the border wall. That would just be the most amazing thing ever, and Ted Cruz would forever be my hero if that was the case. Of course, sadly, it seems like the border wall may be stalled for a little bit due to President Trump not apparently wanting to put it into his budget. So whatever. We'll deal with that one a little bit later. If you enjoyed this video, and I hope you did, please subscribe. Leave a comment if you've got something you would like to say. You know, if you've got any suggestions, anything you'd like for me to talk about, perhaps, or just want to chime in, I'd like to hear from you. Also, if you'd like to hear the audio version, I've got that on SoundCloud. You can also follow me on Twitter or Facebook, and I will have the links for all that in the description. I hope you have a wonderful day, and may the Force be with you.